Hello and welcome. A little over a year ago, we conducted a series of teachings from the scriptures, and this was the purpose at that time was due to the fact that churches were not supposed to meet. And so at that time we entitled it the Lockdown Bible Study. And of course we're not in lockdown now, but we do want to continue with the studies because a few people have requested that we do so. So that's what we're going to start a series now. Excuse me. And the title of this series is going to be In Pursuit of Wisdom. Now, I want to be clear, we're not talking about all of the ways that wisdom could be expressed or demonstrated. We will, of course, touch on that to some degree, but the subject is about the pursuit of wisdom. Now, for example, as a parent, you surely would want your children to grow up with wisdom. I think any responsible parent would want that. And so what would you say to your children? What kind of things would you say? How would you encourage them? How would you try to guide them or instruct them so that they can grow up to have wisdom? And I want to begin with reading a scripture out of Proverbs chapter 4 and verses 5 through 9. I won't read verbatim everything in here, but it says, "Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or swerve from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you." Wisdom is supreme, of utmost importance, supreme. In fact, he goes on to say, though it cost you all you have, get understanding. And so, according to the scriptures, the most important thing that we can obtain to enable us to live a productive, a meaningful life is wisdom. And so that's what we want to talk about, how we would go about pursuing wisdom. And let's start to make sure we understand our terminology. Let's begin with definitions. Let's talk about the difference between knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Knowledge is defined as the information that is gained through education or awareness or observation. It's, in simple terms, it's awareness. I know what day it is. I know where I am because of what I observe. I've learned some things as a result of education, and so that's what we simply call knowledge. But knowledge alone is not understanding, and it certainly isn't wisdom. Understanding is defined as the ability to perceive and comprehend the significance of things or situations. It is the ability to comprehend how for example, the components of complex situations relate and work together. We can take something as simple as an automobile. Almost every adult knows that you can put a key in an ignition, start the engine, put the vehicle in gear, accelerate and move the vehicle. But understanding how an engine works and how an engine works in relationship to a transmission and a drivetrain, that's totally different. So understanding is the ability to see how systems work together and apply the knowledge you have to a desired result or a desired end. Now, wisdom is even a step beyond that. Wisdom is the ability to discern modes of action with a view to their result, that is, their consequences, which is exactly understanding would accomplish the same thing. But wisdom is more than the ability to apply knowledge to a particular or desired end. For example, as I said, I know how to start an engine and make a vehicle go. But everything I understand about how that entire system works together, I could write on one side of a 3x5 card, because my understanding is extremely limited on that subject. Now, wisdom is not only the ability to apply that knowledge to a desired result or a desired end, it's the ability to apply that to a constructive and productive end, a productive result, a beneficial result, which of course brings in the subject of good judgment. Now let me use an analogy here. Several years ago, I guess it was back in the 70s, a man by the name of Ted Kaczynski started mailing explosives through the mail. Now, he had an agenda that he wanted to accomplish. He was opposed to technology. And when he tried to talk about his views on technology, people just didn't really pay attention to him. So he decided to get people's attention, and he began mailing explosives to people who he thought was causing what he considered to be the problem. Now, there was a documentary that we watched maybe a year ago, and it was called The Hunt for the Unabomber. Now, that was the name that was given him by the media. And we discovered in there that Kaczynski was a man of extreme intelligence. There's an organization in I'm sure it's a worldwide organization. I think it's called Mensa. It's an organization for people who are extremely intelligent, high intelligence, far above average. If my memory is correct, a person needs an IQ of between 130 and 40, something like that, to qualify for entrance into this society. Well, Ted Kaczynski had an IQ, according to this documentary, of over 174. Now you think about that, the difference between 134 and 174 is phenomenal. This man was, by all reasonable standards, a genius. And he was able to apply his knowledge and his understanding to accomplish the result that he wanted to accomplish. And now the question is, how many of us would consider that wisdom, to be able to send explosives through the mail and seriously harm or sometimes kill people because you wanted to get your point across? I mean, if that is a satisfactory definition of wisdom, then our world is in trouble, because then we don't really know what wisdom is. So wisdom has to imply good judgment. It has to involve the ability to apply this knowledge and understanding toward benevolent, productive, constructive results. Now, the scriptures bear that out in James chapter 3, in which he talks about what he calls true wisdom and superficial wisdom. True wisdom, he brings out in this scripture, it's pure, it's peace-loving, it's courteous, It's willing to yield to reason. It's full of compassion and good fruits. It's wholehearted and straightforward. It is impartial and unfeigned. It's benevolent, as opposed to a superficial wisdom that has the ability to apply knowledge to something that I may want to accomplish. But if it's not benevolent and beneficial, it's not wisdom. In fact, the scripture that talks about superficial wisdom says it will produce confusion, unrest, disharmony, rebellion, and all sorts of evil and vile practices. So wisdom then is more than ability. It's the good judgment. It's the ability to make sensible, wise, productive decisions. Now, what I'd like to do now is just illustrate something in relation to the scripture we read in Proverbs, which talked about the supremacy of wisdom. Let's talk about temptation, wisdom and temptation. I think this will really help us understand the point that's being made. In James chapter 1, the scripture says when a person is tempted, they shouldn't say, God is tempting me, because God cannot be tempted by evil, and he does not tempt anyone. He goes on to say each one is tempted when by his own desire he is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death, or brings forth death. Now there are 5 stages that are mentioned in these verses, 5 stages of the process of temptation. Number 1 is desire. Number 2 is conception. Number 3 is birth. Number 4 is growth. And number 5 is death, or we could say the consequences. So it's desire, conception, birth, growth, and consequence. Now, in order to understand what's being said here, we need to think back and talk about how people think, how we make decisions, how we determine a particular course of action. And we have to go back to what we Christians refer to as the fall of mankind, when Adam and Eve disobeyed God. As a result of that, and being separated from God, the consequence, the Lord said, that you will be subject to toil the rest of your life. One of the scriptures uses the term, you'll earn your living by the sweat of your brow. Now, he is not saying that work is a consequence of the fall or the rebellion. He's saying that toil is. Now, toil can be thought of as unproductive work. For example, if a farmer is going to plant crops in a field, and the field is covered by thorns and thistles or heavy brush, before this farmer can plant crops, they first have to remove all of the non-productive growth that's on that property. Thorns, thistles, brush, heavy brush, maybe cut down heavy brush. Now that work could be thought of in this context as unproductive. Now it's obviously productive in the sense that it's preparing, but it's what you do in order to do something that you want to accomplish. It's like painting. Well, if I could use the illustration of painting. Painting is easy. Taking a roller and dipping it in a pan and putting the paint on a wall, that's not hard. What's difficult is all the work you have to do to prepare to paint. Scraping, sanding, puttying. That takes longer. It's more toilsome than actually putting paint on the wall. And so really what the Lord is saying is that the earth is not going to cooperate with you. The earth will produce thorns and thistles. It will produce things that require toil and struggle before you can start accomplishing something productive. And so there's work that is satisfying and rewarding. That's work. And then there's work that's simply troublesome. It's wearying. It's a struggle. That's toil. And so work, I want you to be clear that work is not the curse that God put on humanity. It's toil, it's the struggle of unproductive work. And so what as a result of that, we humans have learned to think a certain way. We've learned to think in a way that we could refer to as cost versus benefit, or in some cases, risk versus reward. And what that means is that when we want to make a decision, let's say, for example, I'm going to apply for a job somewhere. I go in for the interview, and during our discussion, the person is going to ask me what I expect from working there. I'm going to want to know, how much am I going to earn? How many hours a week do you expect me to work? What do I have to do while I'm working? Will there be other benefits such as medical or dental insurance? What about vacation pay? What about pension, IRA, etc.? In my mind, all those questions are taking place. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to know what the benefits will be of working there. Now, while I'm doing that, the person that's interviewing me is going through the same process. Only they're asking the question, how will it benefit me or our company to hire this person? What will it cost me? And how will our company benefit from this person? So we're both going through that process. And I'm not going to accept a job until I believe that the benefit of expending whatever time and effort is required. Why would I accept a job, for example, if I'm going to lose money? Or why would I accept a job for $5 an hour if I can work somewhere else for $10 an hour, or $15 an hour? That wouldn't make sense. And by the same token, that the person who is thinking about hiring me is asking these same questions. Why would I hire this person and pay them $20 an hour when I can hire someone else for $15 an hour and they'll do the same job? So this dynamic is taking place during this interview. So we've learned to think in terms of cost versus benefit. And that way of thinking literally actually affects every single decision you make. Every one. If I could use an illustration of this. Years ago, people used to talk about, they used to use the term window shopping. Now, I haven't heard that for quite some time. But what they meant by that was people might walk through the passageway of a mall and they look through the windows and they daydream, if you will, about having a particular product that's in the window or shown through the window. And they're not actually in the market to buy, but they're window shopping. And we all do this. So we'll walk into a store sometime and a person will say, "Can I help you?" We might say, "Well, I'm just browsing," or "I'm just passing time. I'm waiting for someone, and while I'm waiting, I'm going to just pass time and see what you have." Now, we are obviously interested in what we're seeing, or otherwise we wouldn't do it. So there's an interest. We might attend, for example, an auto show or a car show where hundreds of cars and trucks are on display. And we might walk up and down the area and look at different automobiles and makes of automobiles. And we're interested, but we're not actually what we would call in the market. And why not? Why are we looking, but we're not in the market? We're not prepared to buy. Well, the answer is very simple. The desire is there. We have a desire for something, but that desire is not conceived. If we can use the example that James is using, there's desire, there's conception, there's birth, there's growth, and there's consequence. So we're obviously interested. We'll spend hours, some people will spend hours window shopping or browsing or attending various shows where products are on display and all the time thinking, boy, that would be a great thing to have, or that would be wonderful to have that. But we don't really talk to the salesperson about buying it because we know we're not in the market. In other words, our desire has not conceived. And so the first stage then, of course, is desire. The second is conception. Now, what is meant by this analogy, this conception that James talks about? When desire conceives, it gives birth. Conception is the point, the exact point at which your perception of the benefit is greater than your perception of the cost of that item. Up until that point, you're interested, you have a desire, but you're not going to pull your credit card out or your cash out because you don't believe the benefit is greater than the cost. The moment you conclude that, desire has conceived. It has life. We say that life takes place at the point of conception, and that's the analogy that James is using. Once conception takes place, growth is inevitable unless some disaster strikes. Growth is simply the natural result of conception. And so when you believe that the benefit is greater than the cost, your desire is conceived. You are now in the market. Your frame of mind has changed. Now when you're looking, you're ready to buy. All you're waiting for is to see exactly what you want so you can compare cost versus benefit, etc. And so now, what is the point of birth, using this analogy? Desire, conception, birth. In this analogy, birth then is when you write the check or you get your money out of your pocket and you pay for the product you want. So you start with desire, conception, birth. You are now ready to write the check or put your card on the counter or give the money out of your pocket. And so now you're in that third stage of birth. The fourth is growth, and that is when whatever decision you have made begins to develop. It begins to grow. It begins to bring forth what we might call fruit, consequences. And sometimes after we've made a decision, we experience regret. And, well, I thought this project was going to do more than it does, or I thought it was going to cost less than it actually does. But the death that James talks about is the consequence. It's when the consequences of your decision actually come to bear. Now, where wisdom comes in this is the ability to foresee, to think about what you're doing before you actually do it. To stop and think, okay, if I spend $30,000 on this new vehicle, how is it actually going to change my life? How is it actually going to be a benefit? What will it actually cost? When I calculate insurance, maintenance, etc. That's where wisdom comes in. And that's where the subject of deception comes in. And we need to talk about deception so that we can understand exactly how wisdom works. To be deceived means to believe a lie. But what exactly is the lie? What is the lie? See, what you're thinking about the cost versus benefit, and in this process, there's what we can think of as the perception of cost and the perception of benefit, and the actual cost and the actual benefit. So deception is designed, there's only one strategy of deception. I don't care how, I don't care what someone says to you if they're trying to deceive you or mislead you. Regardless of the words that they're using, regardless of the product that they're trying to get you to go in for, a con man, for example. Deception only has one strategy, and you need to understand this. The single one strategy of deception is to increase the perception of the benefit and lower the perception of the cost. That's it. And if a person can do that to you, and you are in the market, they've got you. You can now, they can count on you making whatever decision they want you to make, because they've convinced you that the benefit is greater than the cost. And what's wisdom got to do with this? Wisdom is the ability to think about this situation, this offer that's being made to you, for example, this temptation, and to think about it and to calculate this perception of the cost and the perception of the benefit, and bring that into harmony with the real cost and the real benefit. That's wisdom. When you make a decision, and the end result is that the actual cost and the actual benefit is the same as the perceived cost and the perceived benefit, you have applied wisdom. You have made a wise decision. And that's the point that we need to understand when we need to realize that this is a very serious issue. Our children are faced today, I was in grade school back in the 50s and high school in the late 50s, early 60s. And when I think back about the temptations that we were faced with at that time, it's nothing compared to what kids are faced with today. We couldn't walk into the school and we couldn't buy marijuana, let alone cocaine. we didn't have the internet. We didn't have people sending us messages on various social platforms, trying to draw us into a certain decision or activity that's not in our best interest. We didn't have that. If we could get our hands on a cigarette, we thought that was big time. And today, that's nothing compared to what kids are faced with today. And they're faced with this in school, and they're faced with this when they're leisure time with their friends. So how do we teach them to make decisions that are in their own best interest? That's why this subject is so important. That's why the scripture says that wisdom is supreme. And if it costs you everything, get wisdom before you start making decisions that are going to end up with serious consequences in your life. So let me just quickly review those 5 stages: desire, conception, birth, growth, consequence. Conception begins the instant you believe that the benefit is greater than the cost. You are now in the market. Once you're in the market, speaking of temptation, once you're in the market, all the person who's tempting you has to do, or all Satan has to do, or the person who's trying to deceive you, all they have to do now is make the product available, because you're ready to write the check. And so the point of birth is when that desire, when that temptation is right in front of you, and you're now in the market. Now, of course, then we have to live with the results of that, or the consequences, if you will. And so wisdom then is more than simply the ability to apply knowledge to a desired end. Now, we're going to take a pause here for a moment, and then we'll continue.